I remember the day my life quietly broke into two halves, the part where I was still someone's wife, and the part where I became only a memory keeper. Widowhood does not arrive like a storm. It seeps in like cold air through cracks you didn't know existed. It settles in your bones, in the silence between ticking clocks, in the empty chair across the table that no one dares to move. Years pass like that, quiet, heavy, stretched thin between survival and remembrance. I learned how to speak less, how to need less, how to carry the weight of memories without letting them spill in front of others. My daughter grew during those years, though I often wondered if she truly grew beside me or away from me. Children don't always understand grief. Sometimes they mistake it for weakness or worse, irrelevance. That morning, the phone rang just as the sunlight was beginning to creep across the floor. I remember staring at it for a moment before answering, as if something inside me already knew that whatever waited on the other end would not be gentle. Her voice came through, rushed and distant, like someone speaking from the other side of a long tunnel. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't pause. She simply said the words as if they were small, ordinary things. We sold the beach house and the car. For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. My fingers tightened around the phone, my breath caught somewhere deep inside my chest. The beach house. That wasn't just a house. That was where your father used to laugh the loudest. That was where the walls held our younger years, our struggles, our quiet victories. That was where you took your first steps on warm sand, where we built something that felt permanent in a world that never is. And the car, that old, worn-out car, carried more than miles. It carried hospital visits, school runs, late-night drives when sleep wouldn't come. It carried us through life when we had nothing but each other. I wanted to ask her why. I wanted to ask her how she could make such a decision without even telling me, but my voice didn't come. Grief has a strange way of silencing you when you need words the most. She kept talking, explaining things in a tone that felt almost practical, almost detached. Expenses, opportunities, moving forward, words that sounded sharp against the soft, fragile world I had been living in. She spoke as if she was solving a problem, as if she was fixing something broken. But she didn't understand that some things are not meant to be fixed. Some things are meant to be held, protected, remembered. When she finally paused, waiting for my response, I realized I had been holding my breath. I let it out slowly, careful not to let it shake. "You sold it," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," she said, "it was time." Time, such a simple word, yet it can be the cruelest of all. Time does not heal everything. Sometimes it only teaches you how to live with the wound. After the call ended, I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing. The room felt smaller somehow, as if the walls had moved closer while I wasn't looking. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock, each second echoing louder than the last. I thought about your father then, about the way he used to stand by the window in the beach house, looking out at the endless horizon as if he could see the future written somewhere in the waves. He used to say that everything we built was not just for us, but for the life that would come after us. I wondered what he would say now. Would he understand her decision? Would he forgive her? Or would he, like me, feel that something sacred had been taken away too easily? But beneath the pain, beneath the shock, there was something else stirring quietly inside me. Not anger, not even disappointment. Something deeper. Something that had been waiting patiently for years. A truth. There are things my daughter does not know. Things I never told her, not because I didn't trust her, but because I was waiting for the right moment. Your father and I were not people of wealth, at least not in the way the world measures it. We struggled, we saved, we sacrificed. But your father, he believed in preparing for storms long before the sky darkened. There is a part of our story hidden away, tucked carefully beneath years of silence. A fortune not just of money, but of decisions, of foresight, of quiet planning. It was never meant to be revealed in haste. It was meant to come forward when the time demanded it. And now, perhaps, that time has come. But I did not rush. I did not pick up the phone to call her back. I did not confront her or reveal anything. Instead, I sat there in the stillness, letting the weight of the moment settle fully. Because this is not just about a house or a car. This is about understanding. About what we value, what we let go of, and what we hold on to even when the world tells us to move on. That evening, as the light faded and the shadows grew longer, I found myself speaking softly into the emptiness. "I am still here," I said, though I wasn't sure if I was speaking to him, to myself, or to the memories that refused to leave me. And for the first time in years, I felt something shift. Not a breaking, but a beginning. The kind that comes quietly, without warning, when life decides that your story is not over yet. The rest of that day passed in a strange, heavy silence, as if even the air around me had thickened with the weight of what I had just heard. I moved slowly through the house, touching familiar Arabic halif, Arabic lamb, Arabic hamzata talif, Arabic sheen, Arabic yet, Arabic halif, Arabic hamza, without really seeing them, as though I needed to reassure myself that something, anything, still belonged to me. Every corner held a memory, and every memory now felt fragile, like it could be taken away just as easily as the beach house had been. I tried to sit, then stood again, unable to settle, my thoughts circling back again and again to her voice, so calm, so certain, so unaware of what she had truly done. I kept hearing the word time echoing in my mind, and I wondered when time had quietly turned me into someone whose feelings could be set aside, whose memories could be sold without even a conversation. It wasn't just the loss of a place or a thing. It was the realization that somewhere along the way, I had become invisible in my own daughter's life. I walked toward the old cabinet where I kept the few things I had never allowed myself to throw away, my hands trembling slightly as I opened it. Inside were letters, small photographs, and pieces of a life that once felt whole. I picked up one of his letters, the paper worn at the edges, his handwriting still strong and steady, and I felt my chest tighten as if grief had found a new way to return after all these years. He had always written about the future, about security, about making sure that no matter what happened, I would never be left helpless. At the time, I thought he was simply being careful, maybe even overly cautious. I never imagined how much those quiet decisions would one day matter. I sank into the chair, the letter resting in my lap, and for a moment I allowed myself to feel everything I had been holding back, not just today, but for years. The loneliness, the quiet sacrifices, the way I had chosen to stay strong so my daughter would not see how much I was breaking inside. I had given her everything I could, not just in things, but in love, in patience, in the countless moments where I put her needs before my own without ever asking for anything in return. And yet, somehow, it had not been enough to keep me included in the decisions that mattered. Tears came then, slow and silent, tracing paths I no longer bothered to wipe away. But even as they fell, there was a part of me that remained steady, almost watchful, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment. I thought about the hidden truth I carried, about the quiet security your father had built piece by piece, never speaking of it openly, only leaving behind small hints that I had only fully understood after he was gone. It was not just money, it was a promise, a safeguard against exactly this kind of uncertainty. I realized then that my daughter believed she had taken control of the situation, that she had done something necessary, even wise. She did not know that the foundation she thought she was securing had always been stronger than she imagined. But more than that, she did not yet understand the weight of what she had chosen to let go. I closed my eyes and leaned back, letting the silence wrap around me again, but this time it felt different, not suffocating, but almost protective. For the first time since the call, I was not thinking about confronting her or correcting her. I was thinking about waiting. Because some lessons cannot be told, they have to be realized. And perhaps this was not just a moment of loss, but the beginning of something my daughter needed to face on her own. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back where it belonged, my hands steadier now. The pain had not disappeared, but it had shifted, settling into something quieter, something more controlled. I stood up and looked around the room again, and though it still felt heavy with memories, it no longer felt like something that could be taken from me so easily. Because what truly mattered had never been in the walls of a beach house or the frame of a car. It had always been here, within me, within the life we had built together, within the truths that were still waiting to be revealed. And as the night slowly deepened outside, I understood that this story, my story, was far from over. That night did not bring sleep, only a quiet stretching of hours that seemed to move without mercy, each minute reminding me that something irreversible had already happened. I lay on my bed staring into the darkness, listening to the faint sounds of the world outside. And for the first time in years, I felt the past pressing closer than the present. Memories I had carefully folded away began to unfold on their own, one after another, as if they had been waiting for this moment to return. I saw him again, not as he was at the end, fragile and fatting, but as he had been in those early days, full of quiet determination, carrying dreams that were too large for his circumstances, yet never too heavy for his spirit. He had always believed in building something that would outlast us, something that would protect even when we were no longer there to do so ourselves. I remember the evenings when he would sit with papers spread across the table, numbers and plans that I never fully understood, and when I would ask, he would simply smile and say that one day it would all make sense. At the time, I trusted him without needing explanations, because love often asks for faith more than understanding. As I lay there, I realized how much of that faith I had carried alone after he was gone, holding on to his quiet assurances even when life gave me reasons to doubt them. There had been moments, many moments, when I felt overwhelmed, when the responsibility of raising our daughter and preserving what little we had felt like more than I could bear. But I never allowed myself to break in front of her. I became both softness and strength, comfort and discipline, filling the spaces he had left behind with everything I could offer. I thought I was doing enough. I thought that by giving her stability, I was also giving her a sense of belonging. But now, as I replayed her words from that morning, I wondered if somewhere along the way, I had given her security without teaching her the value of what it cost. The darkness in the room seemed deeper as that thought settled in. It was not blame I felt, but a quiet questioning of myself, of the choices I had made, of the silences I had kept. Perhaps I had shielded her too much from the reality of our life, from the sacrifices that had shaped it. Perhaps she had grown up seeing the results without ever seeing the effort behind them. And now, standing in a world that demands quick decisions and practical thinking, she had done what she believed was right, without realizing that some things cannot be measured in money or convenience. I turned onto my side, pulling the blanket closer, though it did little to warm the emptiness that had settled inside me. My mind drifted back to the beach house, the way the sea breeze would slip through the windows, carrying with it the scent of salt and something indescribably alive. That place had never just been a property. It had been a refuge, a reminder that even in the hardest times, there could be moments of peace. I remembered how we used to sit together in the evenings, watching the horizon change colors as the sun disappeared, and how he would speak about the future in a voice so calm that it made everything feel possible. He had always said that what we were building was not just for us, but for her, for the life she would one day live, for the choices she would have the freedom to make. And yet, here we were. She had made a choice, but not the kind he had imagined. Or perhaps it was exactly the kind he had prepared for, knowing that life does not always follow the paths we hope it will. The thought lingered in my mind, and slowly something began to take shape. Not anger, not regret, but a quiet understanding that this moment was not just about what had been lost, but about what was yet to be revealed. I sat up then, unable to remain still any longer, and walked to the window. The night stretched out before me, vast and silent, the sky dotted with faint stars that seemed distant yet constant. I rested my hand against the cool glass and closed my eyes, taking a slow breath. There was a part of me that wanted to call her, to demand an explanation, to tell her everything she did not know. But another part, stronger, steadier, held me back, because this was not a moment for reaction. This was a moment for patience. She believed she had reached a conclusion, that she had taken control of her circumstances. But life has a way of revealing its truths in layers, not all at once. And the truth I carried was not meant to be given in anger or hurt. It was meant to be understood. As I stood there, I felt a quiet resolve begin to settle within me. For years, I had lived in the shadow of loss, allowing the past to define the shape of my days. But now, something was shifting. This was no longer just about holding onto memories. This was about stepping forward, about deciding how and when to bring the hidden parts of our story into the light. I opened my eyes and looked out into the darkness again, but this time it did not feel as heavy. Somewhere beyond the stillness, beyond the silence, there was a future waiting to unfold, one that neither my daughter nor I fully understood yet. And for the first time since that phone call, I felt ready to face it. Morning arrived quietly, as it always does, but something within me had changed during the long, restless night. The light that entered through the window no longer felt soft and comforting. It felt revealing, as if it were asking me to see things clearly, without the comfort of illusion. I sat at the edge of my bed for a long time, my hands resting in my lap, my thoughts unusually still. There was no rush inside me anymore, no immediate urge to react or to question. Instead, there was a calmness I had not felt in years, a calmness that comes not from peace, but from decision. I moved slowly through the house, noticing details I had overlooked before, the faint cracks along the walls, the worn edges of the furniture, the quiet evidence of time passing without interruption. This house had held me together in ways no one else could see. It had witnessed my silence, my grief, my quiet resilience. And yet, even here, I had begun to feel like a guest in my own life, moving carefully around memories instead of living within them. As I prepared a simple cup of tea, I found myself thinking not of what had been taken, but of what had been hidden. Your father had always been deliberate, careful in ways that often felt excessive at the time. I remember how he would insist on keeping records, on planning for possibilities that seemed too distant to matter. There were moments when I would laugh at his seriousness, telling him that life could not be controlled so precisely. But he would only smile in that quiet way of his, and say that control was never the goal, preparedness was. That word stayed with me now as I placed the cup on the table and sat down. Preparedness. He had prepared for absence, for uncertainty, for a future where we might be left to stand on our own. And I had trusted him, even when I did not fully understand the extent of what he had done. After finishing my tea, I stood up and walked toward a part of the house I had not entered in a long time. The small room at the end of the hallway had remained mostly untouched, as if time itself had agreed to leave it alone. The door creaked slightly as I opened it, and a faint scent of old paper and wood greeted me. It was his room, though I had never called it that aloud. It was where he used to sit for hours, writing, organizing, thinking in ways I had never interrupted. I stepped inside slowly, my eyes scanning the familiar space. The desk was still there, exactly as he had left it, its surface holding the quiet imprint of his presence. For a moment, I hesitated, my hand hovering above it, as if touching it might disturb something sacred. But then I let my fingers rest on the wood, and a strange sense of grounding settled within me. I opened the drawer carefully, knowing what I would find, and yet feeling the weight of it as if it were the first time. Inside were the documents he had spent years arranging, papers I had only briefly looked at after his passing, too overwhelmed at the time to fully understand their meaning. Back then, I had closed the drawer and chosen to focus on surviving each day. Now, I realized that survival had slowly turned into avoidance. One by one, I took the papers out, laying them on the desk, my eyes moving across the lines with a clarity I had not possessed before. Accounts, investments, carefully structured plans, all quietly built over time, hidden beneath the simplicity of the life we had lived. It was never about appearing wealthy. It was about being secure without needing to show it. A deep breath escaped me as the full realization settled in again. My daughter had believed she was solving a problem, creating stability by letting go of what she thought were our last remaining assets. She did not know that what she had sold was only a small part of a much larger foundation. But more than that, she did not know why those things had been kept in the first place. They were never just possessions. They were reminders, anchors to a life that had meaning beyond its material value. I sat down in his chair, the papers spread out before me, and for a moment I allowed myself to imagine what he would say if he could see me now. I could almost hear his voice, not loud, not forceful, but steady, guiding. He would not tell me to be angry. He would not tell me to confront or accuse. He would remind me, as he always did, that understanding takes time, and that people often learn only when they are ready to see. My fingers traced the edges of one document, and I felt a quiet strength rising within me. For so long, I had lived as though everything depended on holding on preserving what was left. But now I understood that true security had never been about clinging to the past. It had been about knowing that even if something was lost, the foundation beneath it would remain. I gathered the papers carefully, returning them to the drawer but not closing it completely this time. It felt different now, not like something hidden away, but like something waiting. As I stood up, I realized that the next step was not about revealing everything at once. It was about choosing the right moment, the right way. My daughter needed to understand not just what existed, but what it meant, and that understanding could not be forced. I walked back into the main part of the house, the quiet no longer pressing in on me as it had before. Instead, it felt like a space I could move through with intention. The pain of what had happened was still there, but it no longer felt like something that controlled me. It had become something else, a turning point, a quiet shift from waiting to acting. And as I looked around, I knew that the time for silence was slowly coming to an end. The days that followed moved with an unusual stillness, as though life itself had paused to watch what I would do next. I did not call her, and she did not call me either. That silence between us stretched quietly, not filled with anger, but with something far more fragile, distance shaped by misunderstanding. I went about my routine as I always had, but every action carried a new awareness, a sense that I was no longer simply enduring my days, but preparing for something that had not yet revealed itself fully. Each morning, I would sit by the window with my tea, watching the world wake up in its ordinary rhythm. People passed by, unaware of the quiet storm that had passed through my life, unaware that something as simple as a phone call could change the way a person sees everything. I realized then how often life-changing moments happen without witness, without sound, leaving no visible mark except within the person who carries them. I found myself thinking about her more often than I allowed myself to admit, not with anger, but with a kind of distant curiosity. I tried to imagine what her days looked like now, what thoughts filled her mind, what pressures she carried, what justifications she had built around her decision. I wondered if she ever paused, even for a moment, to consider what that house had meant to me, or if, in her world, it had already become just another step forward, something necessary and practical. There were moments when a quiet ache would rise within me, not because of what she had done, but because of what it revealed. Somewhere along the way, she had learned to make decisions without me. Somewhere along the way, I had become someone she informed, not someone she consulted. And that realization carried a deeper loneliness than widowhood ever had. One afternoon, as I sat sorting through old things that no longer seemed as insignificant as they once did, I came across a small photograph tucked between the pages of a book. It was taken at the beach house many years ago. She was young then, her laughter almost visible even in stillness, her small hand gripping mine as if letting go was never an option. I studied her face carefully, searching for that same closeness in the woman she had become. It was still there, I told myself. It had to be. But perhaps it had been buried beneath the weight of growing up, of responsibilities, of a world that teaches people to prioritize survival over sentiment. I held that photograph longer than I intended to, my thumb tracing its edges as if I could reach back into that moment and hold on to it just a little longer. But time does not move backward, no matter how much we wish it would. It only carries us forward, sometimes gently, sometimes without warning. As I placed the photograph aside, my thoughts returned once again to the truth I carried, the quiet foundation your father had built, the security that still existed beyond what she knew. I realized then that this was not just a matter of revealing it. It was a matter of timing, of understanding what that revelation would mean, not just for her, but for me as well. If I told her now, would she understand? Or would she simply see it as a solution, another resource to be managed, another problem resolved? Would she recognize the years of thought and care that had gone into it, or would it become just another number, another transaction in a life that seemed to move too quickly to pause for reflection? These questions settled heavily within me, and I understood that this moment required more than truth, it required patience. Because truth, when given too soon or without context, can lose its meaning. That evening, I found myself returning to his room once again. The drawer remained slightly open, just as I had left it, as if inviting me to look again, to reconsider, to understand more deeply. I sat at the desk, my hands resting lightly on its surface, and closed my eyes for a moment. I don't know if I'm doing this right, I whispered into the quiet, my voice softer than I expected. But I know I have to do something. There was no answer, of course. There never is. But there was a feeling, faint, steady, that I was not entirely alone in this. That somewhere within the choices he had made, within the life we had built together, there was still guidance, still direction, even if it came in the form of quiet intuition rather than words. I opened my eyes and looked around the room again, seeing it not just as a place of memory, but as a space of intention. This was where decisions had been made, where the future had been shaped quietly and carefully. And now, it was my turn to decide how that future would unfold. I stood up slowly, a sense of clarity beginning to take shape within me. This was not about reacting to what had happened. It was about responding in a way that would bring understanding, not just resolution. My daughter needed to see more than the result of her actions. She needed to feel their weight, to recognize what had been lost, and to understand what still remained. And that could not happen through words alone. As I left the room and closed the door behind me, I felt the quiet certainty settle deeper within me. The path ahead was not fully clear, but I no longer felt uncertain about taking it. Because for the first time since that call, I was no longer waiting for life to happen to me. I was preparing to shape what would come next. The following morning carried a different kind of weight, not heavy like sorrow, but steady like purpose. I woke before the sun had fully risen, my eyes opening into a quiet that no longer felt empty. For the first time in many years, I did not linger in bed trying to gather the strength to face the day. Instead, I rose slowly, aware of each movement, as if I were stepping into something new that had been waiting patiently for me to notice it. I dressed more carefully than usual, choosing a simple outfit that I had not worn in a long time. It was not for anyone else. There was no one to see me, no place I had to go that required such attention. And yet, it felt important. It felt like a quiet acknowledgement that I was no longer just passing through my days, I was stepping into them. As I moved through the house, I paused at the doorway, my gaze lingering on the familiar walls, the objects that had remained constant while everything else seemed to shift. I realized then that this house, though filled with memories, was not a prison of the past. It was a place I could leave and return to, not out of obligation, but by choice. Outside, the air was cool, carrying the soft promise of morning. I stepped onto the street with a sense of awareness I had not felt in years, noticing the way the light touched the ground, the distant sounds of life beginning again. For so long, I had kept myself within the boundaries of what was known, what was safe. But now, something within me urged me forward, not in haste, but with intention. I walked without a clear destination at first, letting my steps guide me as my thoughts unfolded. With each passing moment, the quiet resolve inside me grew stronger. This was not just about the hidden truth or the decisions that had been made without me. It was about reclaiming something I had unknowingly set aside, my own voice, my own presence in the life I was still living. After some time, I found myself standing in front of a building I had not visited in years. It was a place tied to documents, to records, to the formal side of life that I had avoided for too long. I stood there for a moment, looking at the door, feeling a brief hesitation rise within me. Not fear, but the weight of what stepping inside would mean. Because this was where things would begin to move from thought into action. I took a slow breath and walked in. The interior felt unfamiliar, though I knew it had not changed much. It was I who had changed, who had stayed away long enough for even familiar places to feel distant. I approached the desk, my voice steady as I spoke, asking for what I needed without explanation, without hesitation. There were formalities, signatures, small conversations that carried no emotional weight, only procedure. And yet, each step felt significant. I was not just handling papers. I was acknowledging what existed, what had been carefully built and preserved, and what now needed to be brought into the present. As I held the documents in my hands, I felt something shift within me again. This was real. Not just a memory, not just a hidden truth, but something tangible that still belonged to me, something that had been entrusted to me. I thought of my daughter then, of how she had spoken with such certainty, believing she was securing our future. I wondered what she would feel when she realized that the future she was trying to protect had never been as fragile as she believed. I wondered if she would feel relief or regret or something deeper that she had not yet allowed herself to confront. But I did not rush ahead in my thoughts. I brought myself back to the present, to the quiet act of taking responsibility for what had been left in my care. When I stepped back outside, the day had fully begun. The light was brighter now, the world more awake, and I felt a calm steadiness settle within me. There was still much to be done, still decisions to be made, but the uncertainty that had once clouded my thoughts was no longer there. I walked home with a slower pace, not because I was tired, but because I was aware. Aware of the ground beneath my feet, of the path I was choosing step by step. For years, I had moved through life as if I were following something already decided. But now, I understood that there were still choices left to make, still moments where I could shape what came next. When I reached the house, I paused at the door, my hand resting lightly against it. This place, this life, these memories, they were not something to be protected out of fear. They were something to be honored with clarity and strength. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, not as someone returning to solitude, but as someone carrying purpose with her. And in that quiet space, I knew that the time for waiting was slowly coming to an end. The afternoon settled gently around me, but inside, there was no longer any trace of the stillness that had once defined my days. Something had awakened, something that refused to return to silence. I placed the documents carefully on the table, my fingers lingering on them for a moment as if acknowledging the weight they carried, not just in value, but in meaning. This was not simply a matter of finances or security anymore. It was about truth, about timing, about the quiet distance that had grown between a mother and her daughter without either of them fully realizing when it began. I sat down slowly, my eyes drifting toward the empty chair across from me. For years, that chair had represented absence, a reminder of what I had lost. But now it seemed to hold something else, an unspoken conversation waiting to happen. I imagined her sitting there, her posture straight, her voice firm, explaining her decisions with the same certainty she had shown over the phone. I tried to picture how I would respond, what words I would choose, how I would carry the truth without turning it into something sharp or accusing. But every time I reached that moment in my mind, I stopped, because I understood now that this was not a conversation that could be imagined into existence. It had to happen in its own time, in its own way. As the hours passed, I found myself moving through the house with quiet intention, noticing the small details I had long ignored. The way the light shifted across the walls, the faint creak of the floor beneath my steps, the soft echo of my own movements in a space that had grown too used to silence. These were not just signs of solitude. They were reminders that I was still here, still present, still capable of shaping what remained of my life. At some point, I stopped in front of a mirror, something I rarely did for more than a passing glance. I studied my reflection carefully, seeing not just the lines that time had etched into my face, but the strength that had settled behind my eyes. For so long, I had seen myself only as someone who had endured, someone who had survived loss and carried it quietly. But now I saw something more, someone who was beginning to act, to decide, to step forward instead of simply holding on. I raised my hand slightly, touching the edge of the mirror as if to confirm that the person I was seeing was real, that this shift within me was not just a fleeting feeling, but something lasting. "I am not finished," I whispered, the words soft but certain. The room remained silent, but the echo of those words stayed with me as I turned away. Later that evening, I found myself drawn once again to the past, not in a way that pulled me backward, but in a way that helped me understand what had led me here. I thought about the years after he was gone, about how I had slowly built a life that revolved around stability, around making sure that nothing would fall apart again. I had focused so much on protecting what we had that I had forgotten to prepare for the moment when things would change despite my efforts. Perhaps this was that moment. Not a breaking, but a turning. I walked toward the small shelf where I kept a few things that had always felt too important to put away completely. Among them was a small box, simple and unremarkable on the outside, but carrying a quiet significance I had never spoken of. I picked it up carefully, feeling its familiar weight in my hands. Inside were a few items that had remained untouched for years, small reminders of decisions made long ago, of promises that had been kept without recognition. I looked at them now with a different understanding. These were not just keepsakes. They were pieces of a story that had not yet been fully told. I closed the box gently, holding it close for a moment before placing it back where it belonged. Not hidden, but waiting. Because that was what everything seemed to be doing now, waiting. Waiting for the right moment, the right words, the right understanding. As night began to settle once again, I sat by the window, the familiar quiet surrounding me. But it no longer felt empty or heavy. It felt like a space filled with possibility, with something just beyond reach but slowly coming closer. I thought of her again, of the life she was living, of the choices she was making. I wondered if she felt the distance between us as deeply as I did, or if she had convinced herself that everything was as it should be. I wondered if she would be ready to hear what I had to say when the time came, or if she would resist it, holding onto her own understanding of the world. But even as those questions rose, they did not disturb the calm that had settled within me. Because I knew now that this was not about forcing an outcome. It was about allowing a realization. And realizations, I had learned, cannot be rushed. They arrive when they are ready, often in ways we do not expect, changing everything in a single, quiet moment. As I sat there, watching the last light fade from the sky, I felt a quiet certainty take hold within me. That moment was coming. The next few days passed with a quiet rhythm, but beneath that calm, something unseen was slowly unfolding, like a tide pulling back before its return. I no longer felt the urge to fill the silence between me and my daughter. Instead, I let it remain, allowing it to stretch naturally, knowing that not all distances are meant to be closed immediately. Some are meant to reveal what truly lies between two people. I spent more time outside the house than I had in years, walking slowly through familiar streets that now felt slightly different, as if I were seeing them through a clearer lens. The world had not changed, but my place within it had shifted. I was no longer moving through it as someone defined by loss alone. I was beginning to move as someone who still had choices left, decisions to make, and a voice that had remained quiet for far too long. One afternoon, as I returned home, I noticed how the house greeted me, not with emptiness, but with a kind of still patience. It was as if it, too, understood that something was about to change. I placed my keys down gently and paused for a moment, listening. There was no sound except my own breath, steady and calm. Without thinking too much about it, I walked toward the telephone. My hand hovered above it for a brief second, not out of hesitation, but out of awareness. This was a step forward, not backward. This was not about reacting to her decision, but about beginning something that needed to happen. I picked it up and dialed her number. The ringing felt longer than usual, each second stretching slightly, carrying a quiet tension with it. When she finally answered, her voice carried a hint of surprise, as if she had not expected to hear from me so soon, or perhaps at all. "Hello." For a moment, I said nothing, not because I didn't have words, but because I wanted to choose them carefully. Then, softly, I spoke. "I was thinking about you." There was a pause on the other end, a small silence that felt different from the one that had existed between us these past days. This one was not distance, it was uncertainty. "I've been busy," she replied after a moment, her tone slightly guarded, as if she was unsure of where this conversation might lead. "I know," I said gently. "Life moves quickly." Another pause followed, and I could sense the unspoken questions forming in her mind. She was waiting for confrontation, for disappointment, for something that would confirm whatever she had prepared herself to hear. But I did not give her that. Instead, I spoke again, my voice steady but calm. "I would like you to come and visit me." The words hung between us, simple yet carrying more meaning than they appeared to. It was not a demand, not even a request filled with urgency. It was an invitation, one that held space for understanding if she was willing to step into it. She hesitated. I could hear it clearly, the slight shift in her breathing, the quiet calculation of her thoughts. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice softer now, less certain. Yes, I replied. Everything is as it should be. It was the truth, though not in the way she might have expected, because what was unfolding was not something that could be measured by immediate circumstances. It was something deeper, something that required time to fully take shape. I'll see when I can come, she said, her tone still cautious but no longer distant. I'll be here, I answered simply. And then the call ended. I placed the phone back down slowly, my hand resting on it for a moment as I let the conversation settle within me. It had been brief, almost ordinary on the surface, but I could feel the shift it had created. Something had opened, a small space where there had only been silence before. I walked to the window once again, looking out at the quiet world beyond it. The sky was beginning to change colors as evening approached, soft hues blending into one another in a way that felt both familiar and new. Soon she would come. And when she did, it would not just be a visit. It would be a moment where the past and the present would meet, where choices would be seen for what they truly were, and where the truth I had carried for so long would finally step out of silence. But even now, I did not feel anxious or rushed, because I understood something I had not fully realized before. This was not just her awakening. It was mine as well. Days after that call felt different, as though time itself had softened its edges in anticipation of what was to come. I moved through the house with a quiet awareness, noticing how even the smallest details seemed to carry a sense of preparation. I found myself opening windows more often, letting fresh air move through rooms that had long been closed to anything new. It was not just about cleaning or arranging, it was about making space. For her, for the conversation, for whatever truth would unfold between us. I did not know exactly when she would arrive, and strangely, that uncertainty did not trouble me. There was a time when waiting would have filled me with restlessness, with questions that demanded immediate answers. But now, waiting felt different. It felt like a necessary pause, a moment where everything was quietly aligning in its own way. Each evening, I would sit by the window, watching the light fade slowly, thinking about the years that had brought us here. I thought about her childhood, about the countless times she had run to me without hesitation, her trust so complete that it never needed to be spoken. I wondered when that changed, not in a way that carried blame, but in a way that sought understanding. Because change does not happen all at once. It happens in small, unnoticed moments that gather over time until they become something we can no longer ignore. I also thought about the decision she had made, and I tried to see it through her eyes. Perhaps she had felt pressure I did not fully understand. Perhaps she believed she was protecting us, ensuring stability in a world that often feels uncertain. The more I allowed myself to consider her perspective, the less I felt hurt by the act itself, and the more I began to see the distance that had shaped it. One afternoon, as I was arranging a few things on the table, I heard a sound that made me pause, a car slowing down outside the house. It was a simple sound, one that would normally pass without notice, but something in me recognized it immediately. I stood still, my breath catching slightly as I listened more closely. The engine stopped. For a moment, everything felt suspended, as if the world itself had taken a quiet breath. Then came the soft sound of a door closing. I did not rush to the entrance. Instead, I remained where I was, allowing myself to feel the weight of the moment fully. This was not just her arrival, it was the beginning of something that had been building for days, perhaps even for years. A few seconds later, I heard the faint knock on the door. It was gentle, almost hesitant. I walked toward it slowly, each step steady, my hand reaching for the handle with a calmness I had not expected. When I opened the door, there she was. For a brief moment, neither of us spoke. She looked at me as if searching for something, perhaps a sign of anger, of disappointment, of the reaction she had prepared herself to face. But I offered her none of those things. I simply looked back at her, taking in the familiar features that had once been so small, now shaped by years I had watched from a distance. "You came," I said softly. "Yes," she replied, her voice quieter than I remembered. "I wanted to see you." I stepped aside, allowing her to enter. As she walked in, her eyes moved around the room, taking in the space as if she were seeing it differently now. Perhaps she was noticing the same things I had, the stillness, the quiet presence of a life lived carefully and quietly. We sat across from each other, the same table between us, the same chairs that had once held countless conversations, though none like this. There was a silence at first, but it was not the same silence as before. This one was filled with unspoken thoughts, with questions waiting to be asked, with truths waiting to be revealed. "I didn't know if you would call," she said finally, her fingers lightly touching the edge of the table. "I knew you would come," I answered gently. She looked down for a moment, as if gathering her thoughts, then back at me. "I thought you would be upset," she admitted, "about what I did." I held her gaze, my expression steady. I said honestly, "but not in the way you think." Her brow furrowed slightly, confusion flickering across her face. "I don't understand," she said. And I knew then that this was the moment where everything would begin to unfold. Not all at once, not in a way that would overwhelm, but in a way that would allow her to see, to feel, to truly understand. I leaned back slightly, my hands resting calmly in my lap, and spoke with a quiet clarity. "Tell me why you did it." The question was simple, but it carried weight. Not as an accusation, but as an opening, a space for her to share what had led her to that decision. She hesitated at first, her eyes shifting briefly before returning to mine. "I thought it was the right thing to do," she said slowly. "We needed stability. I didn't want us to struggle, not again." Her words settled between us, and I listened carefully, not just to what she said, but to what lay beneath it. Fear. Responsibility. A desire to protect. And in that moment, I understood something clearly. This was not just about what she had done. It was about what she believed. And that was where the truth needed to begin. The room felt quieter after her words, not in emptiness, but in a kind of stillness that demanded attention. I leaned back slightly, letting the pause stretch, allowing her words and the meaning behind them to sink fully into the space between us. I could see the lines of worry etched on her face, the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers toyed nervously with the edge of the chair. She had carried this decision with her, convinced she was protecting us, shielding us from hardship. And yet, she had done it without knowing the full picture. "I understand why you did it," I said softly, my voice steady but warm. "I really do." She blinked, slightly surprised, as if expecting anger or reproach. "But there's something you do know, something that changes what you think you've lost." Her gaze lifted instantly, curious and cautious. "What do you mean?" she asked, leaning forward slightly. I gestured toward the small desk in the corner, the one where I had kept the documents she didn't know existed. "These," I said, my hand resting lightly on the papers, "are more than what you see on the surface. They are a part of what your father worked for, something that would protect us, even if we couldn't see it at the time." She hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, but also something else, anticipation. I continued, slowly, letting each word carry the weight it deserved. "He believed in building quietly, without showing off, without making a spectacle. He wanted us to have security, not just for now, but for every future we could imagine." Her hands moved toward the edge of the desk, but she stopped, unsure whether she had the right to touch them. I didn't know," she whispered, almost to herself. "I thought I was helping, that I was protecting what we had." "You were," I said gently, "but you only knew a part of the story. You acted out of love and concern, without knowing the foundation that had already been laid beneath everything. And that's not wrong. It's human." For a moment, silence returned, but this one was softer, filled with understanding. She seemed to be taking it all in, letting the idea that we were not as vulnerable as she had thought settle into her mind. Slowly, I opened one of the documents and spread a few sheets carefully on the table. "These are the accounts, the investments, the things your father worked tirelessly to arrange. He wanted to make sure we would never be in danger, that we would always have options, even if life felt uncertain." She leaned closer, her eyes scanning the papers, the lines of numbers and notes forming a pattern she had not anticipated. I never knew," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper, this time with a touch of awe. "All this time." Yes, I said, a quiet smile forming. All this time, the foundation was here. Hidden, yes, but real. And now you can see it for yourself. Not to control it, not to take from it, but to understand the care and thought behind it. Her hands rested lightly on the table now, no longer hesitant. She looked at me, her eyes shining with a mix of relief, regret, and something deeper, recognition. Recognition that the life we had built, the sacrifices made, and the careful planning were not just abstract ideas, but a legacy of love. I didn't realize. I thought I was doing the right thing, she said, voice trembling slightly. But I see now, I see that there's more to this than I understood. I reached out, placing a hand gently over hers. It's okay. You acted with the best of intentions, and now you know, that's what matters. You've learned, and we can move forward together with knowledge instead of fear. Her lips quivered slightly, and I felt the shift in the air between us. The tension, the misunderstanding, the quiet distance, beginning to dissolve. It wasn't complete, not yet, but it had begun. We sat together in silence for a long while, letting the moment settle. Outside, the day continued, but within these walls, a new understanding had taken root. The house, the papers, the hidden fortune, they were no longer just symbols of what was lost. They had become a bridge, connecting past intentions with present awareness, connecting a mother and her daughter who had been separated by misunderstanding, but brought back together by patience, care, and the revelation of truth. And in that quiet, I realized something profound. Love is not always about what is seen, and understanding does not always arrive at the moment it is needed. Sometimes it takes years, patience, and a moment like this, slow, steady, and unassuming, to truly awaken the heart. We were both learning, both awakening, and for the first time in a long while, the future no longer felt uncertain. It felt possible. The evening settled gently over the house, painting the walls with a soft golden glow that seemed to soften even the sharpest edges of memory. We remained at the table, not speaking immediately, both of us absorbing the weight of what had just been shared. The papers between us were no longer just documents. They were proof of care, foresight, and a quiet love that had been patiently waiting for its moment to reveal itself. I watched her study them, her fingers tracing the edges as if to connect physically with the care that had gone into each one. I can't believe all this was here, she whispered after a long pause. Her voice was tinged with wonder and a hint of regret. I thought we were at the end of everything. Sometimes, I said softly, what seems like an ending is really a turning point. Your father built this for times like this, so that even when life seemed uncertain, we would always have a way forward. She nodded, her eyes wet with emotion she did not bother to hide. For years, she had seen me as fragile, as someone defined by loss. But now, seeing the layers of planning and protection her father had left behind, she began to see me differently, not just as a mother, but as a guardian of a legacy that was larger than any single moment of struggle. I'm sorry, she said finally, her voice breaking. I didn't understand. I thought I was helping, but I only saw a small part of it. I reached across the table and took her hand gently. It's okay, I said. You acted from love. That's all anyone can do. And now you understand more and we can move forward together. Her grip tightened on mine slightly, a silent acknowledgement of shared understanding. I felt a warmth rising within me, not the heat of triumph or vindication, but the quiet satisfaction that comes from reconciliation, from seeing someone you love finally awaken to a truth they were not ready to see before. We began to speak more freely after that, sharing memories that had long been held back, recounting stories of her father that she had never fully known, moments of care and sacrifice that had quietly shaped our lives. The conversation was not easy, it was not without pauses and tears, but it was real and it was honest. At one point, she asked me a question I had been quietly waiting for, though I did not expect it so soon. Mother, she said, her voice almost hesitant, why did you never tell me about this before? I smiled softly, choosing my words with care. Because some things need to be discovered when the time is right. Some truths cannot be given, they must be seen and felt. And you weren't ready before, but you are now. Her eyes glistened with tears, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and perhaps even a new sense of responsibility. I could see that she understood that this was not just about money or security. It was about trust, about legacy, about seeing the world through a lens of care and preparation that had been invisible until now. We spent the rest of the evening going through the papers slowly, discussing possibilities, understanding what each document represented, and talking about how it could shape the future. I could see the shift in her demeanor, a lightness emerging where there had once been fear and urgency. She was beginning to see herself not as someone carrying the weight of necessity alone, but as a part of a carefully woven story that had always included her, whether she realized it or not. And in that quiet shared space, I felt something deep within me settle. The fear, the loneliness, the heartbreak, they were still there, but they no longer defined the moment. They had become part of the path that had led us to this understanding, to this awakening. By the time she left that night, we were both changed. Not completely, not as if everything had been solved, but in a way that mattered. She walked out with a new awareness, and I remained behind with the quiet knowledge that the hardest part, the awakening of understanding, had begun. I closed the door gently and leaned against it for a moment, letting the quiet of the house wash over me. Outside, the world continued, oblivious to the small but profound shift that had taken place within these walls. But inside, a mother and her daughter had begun to bridge the distance between them, and that bridge, once crossed, could never be forgotten. I moved toward the window, looking out at the night sky, feeling a rare peace settle over me. For the first time in years, I realized that the journey of loss and misunderstanding had led us to a moment of clarity, a moment where love, patience, and truth met, and something new could finally grow. And I knew, with a quiet certainty, that this was only the beginning. The morning after her visit, the house felt lighter, though the memories that filled its walls had not disappeared. They lingered, as they always would, but now they seemed softer, less sharp. I moved through the rooms with a calmness that had not been mine in years, noticing the details that had once gone unnoticed. The way sunlight touched the floor in the early hours, the faint scent of the sea that drifted through the open windows, the quiet hum of life continuing just beyond the walls. I thought of her often that morning, remembering the way her eyes had widened in understanding, the way her hands had lingered on the papers, the small shifts in posture that revealed recognition, awe, and the beginnings of responsibility. She had seen what I had long carried silently, and in seeing it, she had awakened, not only to the truth about our inheritance, but to the depth of care and sacrifice that had always surrounded her. I moved to the desk where the documents now rested neatly, no longer hidden or secret. I touched them gently, a quiet acknowledgement of the bridge they had created between us. I thought about the years of solitude I had endured after he passed, the grief that had felt endless, the fear that my daughter might one day drift too far from me. And I realized that moment, that conversation, had begun to heal what I thought could never be repaired. She had left the house with tears in her eyes, but also with a new sense of understanding. I knew she would carry the weight of that knowledge carefully, thoughtfully. She would no longer act from fear or incomplete understanding, but from awareness. And in that awareness, I saw the potential for connection, for a future that honored the past without being trapped by it. I walked slowly through the rooms, pausing at the places that held memory, the corners where we had shared laughter, the spaces where quiet conversations had shaped us, the thresholds where choices had been made. Each one felt different now, not because the memories had changed, but because my perspective had. I understood the fragility of life, yes, but also the quiet strength that comes from patience, care, and the courage to let others awaken in their own time. Sitting by the window once more, I watched the world outside as it carried on in its usual rhythm. Children ran along the streets, neighbors tended their gardens, the breeze carried faint laughter and the sound of distant waves. I felt connected to it all, not as someone standing apart, isolated by grief and loss, but as someone who had endured, understood, and emerged with the clarity that comes only through patience and unwavering care. I thought of her again, imagining her day unfolding, imagining the ways she would reflect on what she had learned. And I felt a quiet pride, not in what she had done, but in what she had come to understand. The awakening had begun, and with it came the possibility of a new kind of closeness, one grounded in respect, love, and recognition of the depth of our shared history. As the sun rose higher, filling the room with light, I felt an unfamiliar but welcome warmth within me. The sorrow that had defined so many years was still present, but it no longer held dominion over my heart. In its place was something steadier, something enduring, a knowledge that even in loss, even in misunderstanding, love can endure, understanding can awaken, and a mother's strength can shape the path forward for those she holds dear. I rose from the chair, walking through the house one last time before the day fully claimed it. Each room, each object, each memory seemed to hum with quiet approval, as if acknowledging that the journey was complete, not in the sense that life's challenges had ended, but in the sense that understanding, connection, and love had been restored. And in that quiet moment, I whispered softly, almost to myself, "We have found our way." The journey had been long, filled with heartbreak, patience, and quiet endurance. But in the end, we were not lost. We were awake, we were together, and we were ready to move forward, carrying the lessons of the past as a guide into the future. The house, once a symbol of loss, had become a testament to resilience. And as I looked out toward the horizon, the promise of tomorrow felt not like a question, but like an open path. A path we would walk together, mother and daughter, with understanding, love, and the quiet strength that endures beyond all trials. We were home,